They laughed. Not with you, at the empty resume, the quiet birthdays, the years that did not post well. They said you missed the train, that if you were not early, you would never arrive, and you believed them, long enough for the shame to harden. Look at me. This is not a pity story. This is a warning, because here's what they never learned. The longer the fuse, the bigger the blast. Early winners sprint to be seen. Late starters learn to see. That's the difference. One chases noise, the other studies patterns, and then moves once. They laughed because you started late, but they forgot what late really means. You arrive after the illusions die. You do not build for applause, you build for pressure. You do not beg for a door. You pick a lock no one else noticed. And when it opens, the whole room is yours. Open your phone, scroll through the highlights that made you feel behind. Viral today, vanish tomorrow, shiny, hollow, fast, fragile. That's not success, that's a countdown. Napoleon Hill tried to warn them. Habit installs law. Repeat a thought long enough, and it becomes the air you breathe. They inhaled, too late. You're about to exhale command. Listen carefully. Here's the secret they do not say out loud. Starting late gives you 3 unfair advantages. Selection. You choose better games, clarity, you waste less motion, immunity. You stop asking permission. That's why the quiet ones are dangerous. The ones who disappear before they reappear. The ones who don't announce. They arrive. If you are hearing this, you are not behind. You are loading. The hourglass you feared, flip it. Watch the sand climb back up. Time is not your judge. It's your accomplice, if you learn how to use it. And in the next few minutes, I'll show you how late wins on purpose. How to turn the years they mocked into leverage they can't catch. The selection lens that kills wrong goals, the forge that makes you unbreakable, the auto-suggestion that replaces doubt with orders, and the environment purge that stops other people's decay from becoming your future. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your timing, but you do owe yourself a decision. So, keep scrolling, keep counting other people's laps, or light the fuse you spent a decade wiring. They laughed because you started late. Good. When you finish, they won't be laughing. They will be asking how. This is not a comeback, it's an arrival. Start late? Win. Let's begin. There's a lie so common, so quietly reinforced, that most people never notice when they've swallowed it whole. It does not shout, it whispers, and it sounds like this. You should have figured it out by now. You're too old to start over. That ship has sailed. You hear it in passing comments, in the way someone tilts their head when you say you're still figuring things out, in the smirk that follows the words, he's still chasing. That? No one says it directly, but it's written everywhere. In the headlines, in the casting calls, in the startup pitches. The message is simple. If you haven't succeeded by 30, you're already late. And if you're over 40 and still evolving, still dreaming, still daring to try, the world doesn't see strength, it sees delusion. But pause. Who taught us that life peaks in our youth? Who decided that our best ideas, our sharpest insights, our most lasting contributions had to happen before the age when our brains even finish maturing? It's not biology, it's branding. Hollywood worships youth because it sells tickets. Tech worships youth because it sells the fantasy of the 19-year-old billionaire. Schools worship youth because it keeps the treadmill of standardized achievement alive. It's not about truth, it's about profit. And we bought it. Because when you're young, you believe hype equals greatness. You believe speed equals success. You believe if you're not sprinting, you're already falling behind. So you run, not to build something real, but to catch up with everyone else's timeline. That sprint was not success. It was fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of being the only one still invisible while others were celebrated. And every scroll reinforced it. Open Instagram, open TikTok, and you see it. Younger, faster, louder, richer. Every post, another whisper. You're too late. But here's the truth that burns through the lie. You didn't fail. You were programmed. Napoleon Hill called it the law of cosmic habit force. The idea that any thought, repeated long enough, becomes internal law. It doesn't stay outside you. It becomes you. The voice in your head that says, it's too late, that's not your intuition. That's not realism. That's residue. Leftover programming installed by a culture that confuses youth with value. Think about it. What does youth actually bring? Energy? Yes. Confidence? Maybe. But also inexperience, fragile identity, external dependence. The world sees youth as the pinnacle, not because it's wise, but because it's loud. It confuses volume with value, noise with depth, shine with substance. That's why so many early winners flame out. They built their identity on speed, not strength, on applause, not awareness, on virality, not vision. Their success was a sprint, and sprints don't last. Meanwhile, you, the so-called late one, were still walking, still learning, still collecting dots while they burned out connecting the wrong ones. And here's the paradox that the culture will never admit. Speed is impressive in the short run, but wisdom is undefeated in the long run. The obsession with youth is not a celebration of truth. It's a distraction, a spell designed to keep you chasing, doubting, apologizing for your timing. But if you look closely, you'll see the cracks in the illusion. The child star who collapses in their 30s, the startup genius who burns out before 35, the influencer who goes viral and then disappears into irrelevance, because speed without foundation is a countdown. And when the countdown hits 0, there's nothing left. That's why the lie had to be installed. Because if too many people realized that slower, deeper lives produce unshakable power, the system built on fear and urgency would collapse. So they branded slowness as failure. They labeled patience as weakness. They disguised wisdom as irrelevance, and you believed them until now. Because here's what they'll never tell you. You're not running late. You're running differently. You're not behind. You're building on another level. The world measures you by clocks, but clocks don't measure awareness. And awareness, the kind that comes only with time, scars, and silence, is worth more than any sprint the culture worships. So, the next time you hear that whisper, "You're too late," remember this. That's not the voice of truth. It's the echo of programming. And you are not here to echo. You are here to rewrite. So, let's flip the story. If being late was a weakness, then why do so many of the fast ones collapse? Why do the early winners, the child prodigies, the 20-something stars, fade before the ink on their success even dries? Because when your victory comes before your identity, you end up building a life that doesn't actually belong to you. You perform, you please, you run fast, but you don't know where you're going. And when the applause fades, so do you. That's not power, that's dependency dressed as achievement. But late bloomers, they're built in silence, forged in years of invisibility, tempered by rejection, refined by trial, sharpened by loss. And that forge gives them strengths no one sees, until it's too late to compete with them. By the time you've reached your late 30s, 40s, or 50s, you've already lived enough cycles to connect dots most people don't even notice. The young see events. You see patterns. You've failed. You've repeated mistakes. You've endured seasons that looked identical, until you learn to read the subtle differences. That's why you can walk into a room and feel what's unsaid. Why can you spot the trap before others even recognize its bait? Pattern recognition isn't theory. It's scars turned into vision. It's intuition made of memory. It's wisdom carved by time. And that ability makes you unshakable in a world addicted to speed. Because speed without pattern recognition isn't progress. It's running in circles. Youth breaks when it's rejected. It collapses under the first no, the first heartbreak, the first collapse of a dream. But you've been here before. You've been rejected and returned. You've failed publicly and kept walking. You've carried disappointment so many times that it doesn't break you anymore. It builds you. Resilience is not loud. It's not motivational quotes on social media. It's the quiet refusal to stay down. It's the muscle you only grow by falling and standing, falling and standing, until standing becomes second nature. That calloused courage is invisible to the outside world, but it is your armor, and when the pressure comes, as it always does, you don't shatter. You absorb it, you channel it, you outlast it, because the world always underestimates the one who's been hardened in silence. When you're young, ego drives everything. Every success is a performance. Every failure is humiliation. Every move is about being seen. But age changes the equation. You no longer need to prove. You don't crave every compliment. You don't chase every like. Instead, you refine. Your clarity doesn't come from ambition. It comes from awareness. You know what matters. And more importantly, you know what doesn't. That's why late bloomers make fewer moves. But each one hits harder. Every decision slices through noise. Every step is deliberate. Every action is weighted with clarity, not cluttered by ego. This is where purpose begins to replace performance. And purpose is infinitely stronger than applause. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming your true self. And here's the truth. Individuation rarely happens in your 20s. Because in your 20s, you're still wearing masks handed to you by parents, teachers, society, culture. You're still acting out roles. You're still addicted to approval. You're still performing identities that don't belong to you. It's only later, when those masks begin to crack, that your real self begins to emerge. After the performances fail, after the old roles collapse, after silence forces you inward, that's when authenticity begins. That's when the self beneath the noise finally speaks. And it is terrifying, because it means letting go of who you thought you were. But it is also sacred, because it means finally becoming who you actually are. This is why the late bloomer carries a depth the young cannot. Because the real self doesn't bloom early. It blooms when it's ready. And when it does, nothing can shake it. Think of a blade. A blade that's rushed breaks in battle. It may shine at first glance, but one strike and it bends. But a blade that has been forged slowly, heated, hammered, cooled, hammered again, becomes unbreakable. That is the late bloomer. Not fragile steel, tempered steel, not shiny, sharp, not fast, fatal. The world mocked the waiting, but waiting was the weapon, because what takes longer to build takes longer to break. So remember this. You're not behind. You're carrying weapons others don't even know exist. Pattern recognition that saves years. Resilience that makes rejection powerless. Clarity that cuts through noise. Authenticity born from individuation. A self tempered in fire. That's why when late bloomers finally move, the world doesn't know how to stop them, because they weren't trained in applause. They were trained in obscurity. And obscurity is the most dangerous forge of all. The world measures power in noise, headlines, followers, applause. It assumes that if you're not seen, you're not real. But what if the opposite is true? What if silence isn't absence, but preparation? What if invisibility isn't failure, but incubation? Because here's what most don't realize. Every life that burns bright must first burn quietly, and the longer the quiet, the deeper the fire. In metallurgy, steel isn't made in daylight. It's made on fire, buried in the furnace, unseen, where the hammer falls again and again. Each strike's a rejection. Each burn is a humiliation. Each cooling a season of waiting. If the blade rushed, it would shatter in its first battle. But if the blade endures the fire long enough, it emerges unbreakable. That's what obscurity does. It forges. It is refined. It strengthens you in silence so that when you do appear, you don't collapse under the first blow. The world thinks invisibility is punishment, but invisibility is the forge. Early winners crave visibility. They build fast, but they build hollow. Every step they take is fueled by applause, and applause is the most fragile foundation of all, because applause fades. And when it fades, the house they built comes crashing down. But the late bloomer, he doesn't waste years chasing noise. He spends those years laying stone, pouring concrete, building underground where no one is watching. That's why when he finally rises, he doesn't shake with every wind of opinion. He doesn't crumble when the spotlight moves on, because his roots are deep, his foundation is real. The delay wasn't wasted time, it was construction time. Think of Colonel Sanders. By the time most men would have retired, he was broke, rejected, and forgotten. At 65, he had nothing left but a recipe and a stubborn refusal to die quietly. So, he got into his car, drove across America, knocked on doors, slept in his front seat, and he heard no more than 1,000 times. Restaurant owners laughed in his face, called him too old, dismissed him as a man chasing delusion. But rejection was the forge. Every no hammered him. Every closed door reheated the steel. And finally, after enough strikes, the blade was ready. Today, KFC feeds millions in more than 140 countries. Not because a man started early, but because a man endured the forge when everyone said he was finished. Or Vera Wang. She wasn't sketching dresses in her childhood bedroom. She wasn't crowned a prodigy at 22. She was a figure skater who failed to make the Olympic team. She was a journalist, an editor, an observer, living lives that didn't yet fit. For decades, she was invisible to the world that would one day worship her. Until 40. When she finally walked into design, and what emerged was not the shallow imagination of youth. It was vision born of patience, texture, and taste. Today, Vera Wang is a global icon. But the world forgets the 39 years of silence that forged her. That's the secret of delay. It disguises itself as shame when it's actually incubation. While others were chasing applause, you were storing energy. While others built fragile houses, you were laying steel foundations. Invisibility isn't weakness, it's the hidden stage of transformation. The caterpillar inside the cocoon looks lifeless to the outside world, but inside, it's rearranging everything. It's not dead, it's rebuilding. So, when you feel invisible, remember, that's the point. The silence is the fire, the rejection is the hammer, the waiting is the tempering. And one day, without warning, the blade emerges, sharp, dangerous, unbreakable. The world expects the loud, the flashy, the early winners who announce themselves before they're even ready. It doesn't expect the ones forged in silence, the ones tempered by rejection, the ones invisible long enough to become unrecognizable. That's why late bloomers are dangerous, because by the time you see them, it's already too late. Their fire doesn't flicker, it roars. Their foundations don't shake, they've been hammered solid. And when they finally arrive, they don't sprint, they don't scream, they just walk into the room, and the ground shifts beneath them. Real transformation doesn't start outside, it begins in the only battlefield that matters, your mind. And right now, that battlefield is overrun with the enemy's voice, a script you never wrote but have been repeating for years. I'm too late, no one will take me seriously. There's no time left. Every time you whispered those words, you weren't describing reality. You were issuing commands, and your subconscious obeyed. It didn't question, it didn't argue. It simply said, "Yes, sir." That's why so many people live the same year 40 times and call it a life. Not because they lacked opportunity, but because their programming never changed. Imagine your mind as a war room. On one side, the old general commanding troops of doubt, shame, hesitation. On the other, a new general waiting to rise. But here's the truth. Only one can give orders at a time, and right now, too many of you are still saluting the wrong voice. Napoleon Hill called it autosuggestion, the principle that any idea, if repeated often enough, becomes law inside you. Most people think they don't practice it, but they do. They've just been practicing it negatively. They've rehearsed their failures so often, they mistook them for their identity. Autosuggestion isn't delusion, it's discipline. Fake it till you feel it isn't pretending. It's rehearsing a new identity until the old one loses power. Here are 3 mantras every late as bloomer must rehearse until they take root. 1. I am not late. I am precisely on time. 2. My scars are experience. My delays are depth. 3. I am not behind. I am prepared. Say them daily, deliberately, even if your voice shakes. At first they will feel fake. They're supposed to, because you're speaking a language your old self doesn't recognize. But keep repeating, and eventually the old general falls silent. And in that silence, the new self begins to speak. Not with apologies, not with excuses, but with commands. Because the battlefield was never against the world. It was always against the script running in your own head. And now, it's time to kill the old script and start giving orders to yourself that you actually want obeyed. You can reprogram your mind all you want. You can rehearse new mantras every morning. You can visualize yourself becoming unshakable. But if you return every night to the same environment of decay, you will sink. Not because you are weak, but because environment always beats willpower. Toxic environments rarely look toxic. They look familiar. They look comfortable. They sound like the laughter of old friends, the warmth of family dinners, the routine conversations you've been having for years. But listen closely to the words beneath the comfort. At our age, you can't expect that anymore. It's too risky to start now. Be realistic. These aren't casual opinions. They are viruses, whispered often enough to take root in your identity. Not all at once, but drop by drop, phrase by phrase, until one day you wake up carrying beliefs you never consciously chose. Imagine a single drop of water, software harmless, forgettable. Now imagine that drop falling on the same stone every hour, every day, for years. Eventually, the stone is carved, not with violence, but with repetition. That is what your environment does to you. Every conversation you tolerate is a drop. Every joke about failure, every sigh about missed chances, every warning to play it safe. And drop by drop, the stone of your identity is carved into someone you never meant to be. You think you're thinking for yourself, but you're echoing the voices you've absorbed. Napoleon Hill didn't sugarcoat it. You become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not just financially, mentally, energetically, spiritually. If your closest circle speaks limitation, you will think in limitation. If they define life by fear, you will breathe fear. Your subconscious listens, not just to you, but to everyone you allow near you. Every repetition is a seed, and if you don't guard your soil, you'll end up with a garden of weeds you never planted. This is the cruel paradox. The people most likely to hold you back are not the ones who hate you. They're the ones who love you, but love you as the older version of yourself. They don't mean to sabotage you. They just can't. Imagine you outside the box they've placed you in. So they hand you comfort. But hidden inside that comfort is decay. And if you choose it long enough, it will rot the future you're trying to build. Now, let's be clear. You don't need to cut everyone off. You don't need to move to the mountains and disappear from humanity. But you do need to become a gatekeeper, not of your time, of your energy. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are protection. They sound like, I still care about you, but I can't afford your influence right now. Suppression stays silent and absorbs the poison. Boundaries speak and refuse to drink it. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to fight them. You simply need to stop letting their words become your script. So, what does the purge look like in real life? Distancing from people you love, but who quietly sabotage you. Saying no to conversations that glorify regret and limitation. Ending phone calls that always end with, just be grateful you got this far. Walking away from nostalgia, heavy groups who only celebrate who you used to be. This isn't cruelty, this is survival. Because becoming requires purification. And you don't need to justify your growth to anyone, you just need to protect it. Here's the truth. You are not being polite when you let people pour poison into your mind. You are not being loyal when you sit through conversations that shrink you. You are being programmed, and if you don't control your environment will control you. So, remember this. The forge that made you unbreakable is useless if you return it every night to a swamp. You cannot bloom in polluted soil. You cannot evolve surrounded by decay. Purify or stay broken. There is a quiet danger most people never recognize until it's too late. It isn't failure. It isn't rejection. It isn't even fear. It's nostalgia. We like to think of nostalgia as harmless, a sweet recollection of how things once were. Childhood summers, youthful confidence, the feeling of being lighter, freer, more alive. But beneath its warmth, nostalgia carries a sharp blade. Because when you cling to who you used to be, you kill who you are meant to become. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona. He understood that the masks we wear, the identities we create to survive a certain season of life, eventually become prisons. The student who was once the quiet achiever, the worker who was the reliable one, the lover who was always forgiving. These roles kept you safe. They gave you belonging, but the more tightly you grip them, the more they turn to chains. Here's the brutal truth. The person you were is not the person you need to be. Yet, nostalgia disguises this sabotage as comfort. It whispers, go back. Remember when life was easier? Remember when you were admired, when you didn't have these scars? And without realizing it, you start negotiating with ghosts. You keep replaying old versions of yourself that never really existed in the way you imagine them. It's self-sabotage wrapped in a lullaby. Think of it like a haunting. You're walking forward into the unknown, but behind you trails a shadow of who you were, pulling, whispering, convincing you that the past was safer, purer, better, and every time you look back too long, you freeze. You start to rot in place. This is why true transformation always feels like grief, because it is grief. You aren't just chasing new opportunities, you're burying old selves. And grief is heavy. Jung's lesson here is devastating, but liberating. To grow, you must allow the old persona to die. That mask you once needed must be laid to rest, or it will strangle you. And so, the moment of honesty arrives. You have to look at the former you and say the hardest words. Thank you for getting me here, but I can't afford to be you anymore. That sentence feels like betrayal, but it is loyalty to your future, because that old version of you, the one who people liked, or who people underestimated, or who people broke, cannot carry you into what's next. The tools that got you to the mountain's base cannot carry you to its peak. This is the trap of nostalgia. It seduces you into believing that your best days are already behind you. And once you believe that, you unconsciously live smaller. You stop risking. You stop daring. You cling to faded glories or broken identities like relics in a shrine. But ask yourself, what if your most powerful self has not even been born yet? What if nostalgia is not a memory, but a thief, stealing the energy you need to create the life you claim you want? The grief of letting go is the price of transformation. It hurts to kill the ghost of who you were, but it hurts far more to spend your life haunted, because the past will keep calling, but your future, your real unshackled self, is waiting, and it cannot breathe until you stop answering. There is a stage in life no one warns you about, a stage that doesn't come with applause, titles, or clear direction. It feels like standing in the middle of a dark forest, unsure whether you're lost or waiting to be found. This is the identity limbo, the invisible season before transformation. In this place, everything feels stripped away. The achievements that once defined you no longer matter. The roles you once played don't fit anymore. You wake up each day and ask, who am I now? And the silence that answers feels unbearable. But this silence isn't death. It is gestation. It is the underground season of the seed, when nothing can be seen above the surface. Yet life is quietly reorganizing itself below. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. From within, everything is happening. The trap most people fall into here is comparison. You see others racing ahead, collecting accolades, crafting polished identities, and you wonder if you're failing. But Jung reminds us, speed is not depth. The river that runs shallow makes the loudest noise. The deep waters of transformation move in silence. History itself proves this limbo is not a weakness, but a law. Before resurrection, there is always a tomb. Before breakthrough, there is always disappearance. Jesus vanished into the wilderness for 40 days. Nietzsche collapsed into silence before birthing his greatest works. Even great empires receded into obscurity before rising again, transformed. The void is not a pause, it is the price. To endure this season is to trust what you cannot see. It means accepting that identity is not built in the spotlight, but in the shadows. You are not being punished, you are being remade. Because when you emerge from this limbo, you will not simply improve, you will transform. And transformation does not give you back what you lost. It gives you something that never existed before. A self not borrowed, not imitated, not inherited, but forged. This is why the silence matters. It's the soil from which authenticity grows. And while the world may rush to crown those who appear ready too soon, you will know a secret Jung understood. Emergence isn't about being faster. It's about being real. The modern world is obsessed with speed. Everything must be instant, visible, and loud. Success is measured in views, likes, and fleeting applause. If you do not arrive early, if you do not peak before the spotlight moves on, the world whispers that you are irrelevant. But hidden beneath this obsession with acceleration is a quiet hunger, a hunger for depth, for wisdom, for something that does not vanish with the next algorithmic scroll, and this is where late bloomers stand apart. Because late bloomers are not just survivors of their own delayed timing, they are the recalibrators of civilization itself. They arrive after the noise has burned itself out, carrying truths that cannot be rushed. While the world spins itself dizzy chasing the next trend, late bloomers are the ones who slow the wheel down and remind humanity what matters. History shows us this pattern. Civilizations collapse not from lack of innovation, but from lack of wisdom. Rome had brilliance, but it also had arrogance. The industrial age had speed, but it lacked soul. In every era, it was those who matured slowly, who watched longer, who suffered in silence before speaking. They became the voices of balance, the architects of meaning. The world does not need more early explosions of brilliance that burn out like fireworks. It needs fires that burn slow, steady, and long, fires lit by late bloomers, the ones who carried their embers quietly through decades of obscurity, only to ignite them when the darkness was greatest. Because what the world truly lacks today is not more noise, not more speed, but endurance. The kind of enduring wisdom that cannot be compressed into a viral moment. The kind of vision that takes half a life to form. Late bloomers are proof that the timeline of truth is not aligned with the timeline of fame. They are the cultural antidote to a civilization dying of its own haste. They are the ones who show us that significance does not come from being first, but from lasting long enough to matter. Wisdom is fire, not the fire that dazzles quickly, but the fire that endures through storms, through winters, through centuries. And it is late bloomers who carry this fire, protecting it in obscurity, until the moment the world desperately needs its light. Because in the end, it is not the early flames that shape destiny. It is the fires that refuse to go out. They won't see the beginning. They never do. Because rebirth does not start when the world finally applauds you. It begins in silence, when you decide to burn the old self to ashes, when you choose to become invisible so that something greater can grow. Understand this. Invisibility is not death. It is incubation. The seed is not gone when it vanishes beneath the soil. The cocoon is not the end when it hides the caterpillar. And you are not behind when the world has moved on without you. You are becoming. That's why the most dangerous people are not the ones who chase recognition. They are the ones who disappear, who let the silence sharpen them, who build in shadows while the world is distracted by noise. And then, one day, they return. Not as the person you remember, but as someone you cannot even recognize. This is the destiny of the late bloomer, not to keep up with the race, but to arrive at a time when the race itself has collapsed from exhaustion. When everyone else is burned out from chasing relevance, the late bloomer steps in with endurance, with depth, with wisdom that does not fade. Rebuild in silence, return unrecognizable. That is your mantra. So, if no one sees you right now, good. If they call you slow, lost, irrelevant, good. It means you're not living on their shallow timeline. It means you're not here to be consumed. You're here to endure, because the world does not need more noise. It needs fire that burns slower, but longer. It needs men and women who arrive later, but arrive with something that actually matters. So, disappear if you must. Be underestimated, let them forget your name. Because one day, when they least expect it, you will return. And when you do, they won't even recognize the person standing before them. Rebuild in silence. Return unrecognizable. If no one sees you now, good. You're not behind, you're becoming.